Everyone, welcome to another episode of Ken Reads during spooky season of Halloween. I know Halloween's in like 30 days, but it's still the festive period of trick or treat, and I should maybe do a Halloween themed week leading up to Halloween because, as a lot of you may know, there's so much dating language that's got a lot of spooky coded words and verbiage like ghosting, haunting, and a whole bunch of other affiliated words as well too, which is always very funny. So yeah, I may do the Avoidant Halloween series towards the end of the month of October as we get closer to Halloween. Anyways, today, Simon has submitted a letter to me that I'm about to read, and I'm very keen to go into this one because I feel like, having gone through it, this is a very, again, relatable story for a lot of people who've been through this experience with someone who is likely got a very severe insecure attachment. So, with that all being said, let's get straight into Simon's letter. Simon writes, "Dear Ken, thank you so much for this work that you're doing. It has helped me so much, and I can see from many comments that I'm not alone. You're particularly great at understanding and communicating attachment dynamics, and you're giving a lot of validation to us all. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it." Okay. Simon writes, "I met Luna on a dating app during COVID at the beginning of 2021, and we were very quickly starting to see each other nearly every weekend. We were in a relationship for 3.5 years. For a good while, I was probably a bit more avoidant than she was. I remember having a lot of anxiety after visits with her and then being relieved afterwards. Well, that's a first. Neither of us had ever experienced a relationship with as much depth and closeness as this one. Although, strangely, much of the depth and vulnerability happened when we took baths together. Well, I guess that's not surprising when you're that close. We were both fairly non-committal, agreeing that our relationship probably wouldn't last forever, especially because of the fact that she thought she might not be staying in the area long term. After about 6 months or so together, we started dropping hints to each other that we wanted more. I have 2 young kids, and early on started to notice her avoidance of doing things with them. The pain I felt around her avoidance of my kids' lives only increased every time. We had many discussions about it, and she would often say things like, she thinks I might be better off with a single mum with kids instead of her. Then at other times, she seemed excited about planning trips for all of us, including my kids." Yeah, that's pretty painful and pretty rude. Don't like how that's playing out. Good on you for also calling her out on that, because that does a lot of damage to the children and makes them feel like we're unseen, unheard, not lovable, there's something wrong with us, when none of that is necessarily true. But unfortunately, child brain, as a lot of you may know, often thinks that if one parent or adult doesn't like me, maybe it's because I've done something wrong, I'm defective, I'm not good enough. So good on you for calling that out, because that behavior is not okay. After 2 years together, we were on vacation in Mexico with some friends. She had just received an invite to a big wedding overseas, and nearly the first thing out of her mouth was that maybe I shouldn't go with her to it. Her reasoning was that maybe we don't travel well together, suggesting that I was not being a great guest on our Mexico trip. In all honesty, I was a bit moody because I wasn't enjoying the food all that much. But I did ask our friend if he had any issues with me as a guest, and he said no, not at all, and that he was having a great time. I think we're starting to see the beginning of some fault finding going on here, which is not great. Being potentially uninvited to the wedding was shattering to me, and I nearly broke up with her the next morning. Whoa. She did some damage control, and then we had a decent time for the rest of the trip together, but her suggestion that I not go with her buried a seed of mistrust that I'd basically swept under the rug. There were other things like this that she had said and done, like excluding me from work events when there were other people when they brought their partners. She also did some heavy fault finding with me in terms of her worry that I might be socially inept because we had met during the pandemic. Okay, this is pretty heavy fault finding indeed, not great. It's interesting to note that I didn't feel very connected to her during the Mexico trip until we were in the ocean together. For some reason, she came alive and opened up to me when we were in the water, just like the bathtub. I'm not about to make any placenta jokes here or to suggest that somehow, having an association with the water is somehow the cause for all this. But all I'm going to say is it is very interesting when we take a step back that there's a lot of hot and cold behavior that's happening, and it occurred way back when, even with the interaction with the children, talks about, the nature of commitment between the two of you. And now when you're going on this holiday to Mexico, there's comments being made about how you may not be appropriate to go together to a wedding, and that somehow you might be socially inept. Like, this is pretty inappropriate sort of stuff to be saying to someone and not okay. So I'm really sorry you're going through this, Simon, because I could imagine how confusing it is that you're getting this passive aggressiveness on this holiday, yet when you're in the ocean together, seemingly that all just evaporates. Hallelujah to the ocean. Not long after we got back from Mexico, we had a minor conflict. When I tried hashing it out over the phone with her, it went poorly, and then within the next few days, she broke up with me. I was blindsided and disoriented because our relationship was great in so many ways. I found myself extremely anxious and doing protest behaviors like writing long messages to her, trying to convince her to stay. She was responsive and eventually came back to the relationship after a couple of weeks. But this was the beginning of our anxious avoidant dance. 6 months later, she did the same thing. Simon, I'm going to have a slight suggestion to your attachment style, but you're not sounding to me like a classic anxious attacher. In fact, I dare say you're sounding to me like someone who's actually more of a fearful avoidant attacher. It is very rare in my experience that I've seen anxious attachers actually go that next step and send a letter directly to their avoidant ex in such intensity. I've met a lot of fearful avoidants who've sent letters to their ex, often out of a place of panic. And you also mentioned that you weren't really feeling connected at the beginning of the relationship too. In fact, it seems like you were quite okay with the non-committal style of this. No judgment. I'm just saying that the way you've written this is distinctive from a lot of the other letters that I've written, where I'm like, this sounds to me like in Luna's case, she was exhibiting a lot more avoidancy, and for you, it came out quite abruptly. I could be wrong, but it does seem to me like this is very unique in terms of some of the stuff that I've normally read out on here and with client cases. But it does, I think, go back to a point that I've made consistently, which is, it doesn't really matter what your attachment style is, that a lot of people can be affected by this kind of behavior. And I am sorry that you're experiencing this, because a sudden breakup like that is disorientating and blindsiding. And I think it's shocking that you had a conflict which you were just trying to hash out, and then next day, boom, it's over. It's like, what? Like, to me, this conflict, based on the way you've written it, sounds like it was nothing. And all of a sudden, you're just being turfed out as if to say, like, you're a terrible human being. So yeah, not okay behavior whatsoever. And I think it does illustrate that Luna does not have good conflict management skills, and also is making up crap about why things aren't working out with you. So again, not cool. Let's see, blah. 6 months later, she did the same thing again. I started to really feel a disconnect between us, and we'd go a week without seeing each other, which was frequent because she avoided my kids. Oh, that's terrible. Things were really great when we were together in person, but she didn't like talking on the phone, so communication was minimal and connection was non-existent. I would get very distraught over the lack of communication and connection, and then I'd call her and share how I was feeling. My emotional dumping was received by her as criticism, and I now know how much of an unhealthy behavior that was on my part. Interesting. So, not to judge you, Simon, but I have to say, in fact, I'm actually very compassionate to you. So it seems to me like you sharing your experiences of what you're feeling were taken as criticism by Luna, which suggests to me that she did not have the space, compassion, or empathy for what was going on in your case at all. So yeah, don't really like what's going on here. So not really cool at all how this behavior is playing out. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I can see someone here says, she sounds fearful, avoidant, and she's instilled fear into him with no commitment. I would agree. He's probably been infected with crippling anxiety and anxious attachment. Now, here's something I just want to address. I know that a lot of people out there have said this rhetoric that if you date someone who's avoidant, you will develop an anxious attachment. I want to just say that your anxious attachment was well there before the avoidant attacher came into your life, but it can exacerbate and also take you into a very anxiously attached place if you are someone who's never experienced this before. It can exacerbate existing anxiously attached wounding if you're someone who's had this stuff as something that came out of childhood. But it does seem like this is quite a severe case of fearful avoidancy from Luna's part. So I do agree that you've probably been sent into a very anxious dimension of attachment that you were not maybe used to before this, but it's not okay how she's treating you. I didn't always approach her in an unhealthy way though. I've been pretty aware of the importance of repair, and I've tried nudging us into healthier ways of doing things. I honestly think that's fantastic that you have awareness of repair and also take the time to consider communication and conflict and how to resolve it, so good on you. When I've asked for some kind of daily communication, my requests would go ignored. She was always saying that I needed to manage my emotions. Fuck me. Okay, I want to take another moment here to say, I get so angry when I hear fearful avoidance saying shit like, your emotions aren't my responsibility, you need to take care of that, that's a you thing to deal with. So it drives me bananas because on one hand, yes, we're not entirely responsible for someone's emotional well-being, but the devil is in the detail with the context. If I am causing someone to feel not only triggered, but also hurt by my behavior, then I actually have a part to play in affecting that person's emotional well-being. It is then their role to inform me, hopefully in a way that's, direct, assertive, and, going to be reparative, to say, hey, that behavior, comment, thing, whatever, hasn't agreed with me. I'd appreciate it if you don't do that going forward. Fair, lovely, and valid. I will take that on because I don't want to make a person feel hurt. But I see a lot of very selfishly inclined people have this attitude as if to say like, well, your emotions are your responsibility. I'm not going to deal with them. And it's like, no. That's not how this works. You don't just get to abdicate your responsibility for how you're impacting someone emotionally. In other instances, when we're navigating it with someone who's expecting us to take on all of the emotional responsibility, then that might be appropriate. So in that instance, I'm like, not really. Like I said, it depends on the context. If you're dealing with someone, for example, who selfishly wants to trauma dump on you over and over again, complains about how they're unhappy with everything, and they're basically expecting you to fix their life because they don't have any agency to work on it, now that's a different story. That person absolutely does need to be taking the time to maybe work on that stuff with a clinician because they're obviously acting out from a state of helplessness and hopelessness and also drowning in victimhood. But that doesn't seem to be the angle that you, Simon, are coming from. If anything, it sounds to me like you're just saying, this behavior, interaction is affecting me. Can we work on this? And you're getting shut down with a, well, that's a you problem, not for me to deal with. So I get really pissed off when I see that sort of stuff because it's invalidating and it's just so not okay. I see someone here's added, I've heard from an avoidant ex, your emotions are your responsibility. I don't want to be codependent. Just Jesus Christ, that just drives me nuts when I hear that, because being able to think about how you're impacting someone doesn't make you goddamn codependent. Codependent is a very specific category unto itself, and being able to hold space for someone emotionally doesn't make you codependent. It only makes you codependent if you're making their entire emotional experience matter ahead of your own. That's a different story. And I think that the way this is, talking out, I'm just like, ugh, no, not okay. All right, let's continue. Simon writes, in January of 2024, at a time when we were both sick, I called her to clarify something we had talked about and how it related to us possibly living together at some point. She got really angry, hung up on me, and disappeared for a couple of weeks. It's still not clear to me what this was all about, except that over time she bottled up anger and frustration until it exploded. Yeah. Oh dear. Okay, so I know I'm stopping and starting a lot, but I have to say, this is very, very severe sort of stuff going on here. And something tells me she does not just have an attachment issue. I wouldn't be surprised if she also has something else, possibly a personality disorder. because it sounds to me like she has incredibly poor emotional regulation skills. She's also triggered at the sight of your children, probably a lot of low self-esteem and low self-worth. It seems like she has to control the relationship to make her feel better at all times. And I think it's interesting how you wanted to talk about possibly living together. Suggests to me that she doesn't like feeling enmeshed, controlled, or decisions are being made against her. And so I suspect that in that moment, she was probably having a bit of an emotional flashback to in a moment where she felt controlled by someone, and she was having a moment of not actually communicating that healthily. Instead, she just simmered, not even simmered, she exploded and went off. I just think, oh, this is such really like petty, petulant sort of behavior. This rupture was also extremely painful for me, and I eventually got her buy-in to find a couples therapist. Good on you. We started doing emotionally focused therapy and experienced some great connection and vulnerability in our sessions that I really needed. It was just a sliver of the emotional connection that I needed with her, but it felt good to have something. Future thing to think about. That is very common for people who've experienced emotional neglect to feel good with the bare minimum. So just be mindful of that, Simon, because you may have wiring where you've experienced a lot of lack of emotional care and nurture for yourself. So I understand that you were probably starved in that moment, but to me, that's always a bit of a red flag if you're finding that you're excited just to get a bit of connection from someone. My brain goes, oh dear, because it sounds to me like you're probably used to having not a lot given in return. You overgive and under-receive. So just think about that if it's appropriate for you. I could be completely wrong, but that's not a fun thing to experience. Luna's disposition is rather stoic and formal, and I was craving emotionality from her. She felt really seen by our therapist, and as a result of this, she was able to access some emotions and bring that into the conversation with me. It felt really great, although several times after our sessions, because she was so uncomfortable with emotion, she sent me home. After one particularly emotional session, she assumed our relationship was over because of the heavy emotions she was feeling. Luna's, let's see, well, what she was feeling. Unfortunately, we were not able to maintain an emotional connection outside of the therapeutic container. Well, it seems like the therapeutic container was literally the thing that both brought out all this amazing positive feeling, but also all this uncomfortable stuff that she couldn't handle. And I think it seems like Luna was assuming, oh, well, if I'm feeling this way, it means the relationship is wrong. And as I've said repeatedly over and over again, just because you're having an intense, uncomfortable emotion does not mean the relationship you are in is wrong. And I think what I'm noticing is that Luna has an incredibly small bandwidth for emotional distress and intolerance. And it seems like she just goes off the handle anytime she's triggered. And it's really important for people with insecure attachment who suffer from emotional dysregulation to widen their tolerance for uncomfortable feelings and also reduce their tolerance for BS behavior. Anyways, more on that another time. Another rupture happened and I did my best to keep it all together. She said things like maybe she's not cut out for a relationship and that when she needs me, she just needs me to just show up without her having to ask. Great, mind reading now. Near the end, I set a boundary and nearly left the relationship because of her continued resistance to being involved with my kids. But she did some deeper exploration of that and came to the conclusion that she was open to getting to know them better and it felt more comfortable moving into a stepmom role. Despite our last couple of months together, things were going really well. With her coming to some of my kids' sport events for the first time, we were getting closer, and it felt like a major thing when she asked me to make some space in my closet for her. The last time we had sex was one of the best times ever, and it was intense and emotional. I found myself a bit withdrawn after it, which surprised me, so I'm wondering if I may have had an even bigger effect on her. We also had a big month ahead of us, with trips planned for both of us as well as some activities involving the kids. A week later, we had a phone call that went south, which was largely my fault for emotionally dumping and threatening our relationship. And then she just disappeared again for a few days. During our next therapy session, she asked for a 2-week break, which meant we wouldn't be doing our planned activities together. Then, after the break, she broke up with me during our therapy session. Jesus. In that last therapy session, she was extremely emotional and crying a lot. She said some things in a wistful way like, how she really does desire closeness and intimacy, and that what she wants in a relationship is joy, levity, and humor. From my perspective, we had so much of that, and she was saying it like it wasn't even there. I felt completely invisible. Her reasoning for the breakup was that she couldn't do our dynamic anymore, and that during the 2-week break, she felt relief. It was also clear that she was putting all the blame on me. Yeah, I'll say she is. She also lashed out with more anger than I'd ever experienced from her, which I was initially confused about. But I think I understand now what happened. I think that every time I would threaten the relationship, usually in response to her withdrawing and taking space, or when she perceived a threat, she was quite affected by it, even though she didn't show it and didn't communicate it with me at the time. Wonderful. This time around, I didn't do much in the way of protest behaviours. Soon after the breakup, I sent a couple of emails, but the only thing she responded to were logistical messages around exchanging our things. There hasn't been any communication between us since, which has been extremely painful for me. It all felt so abrupt and unilateral, and as usual, there was minimal communication. I've been absolutely devastated because I thought she was my person, and things seemingly started to gel with her becoming more integrated into my family. I now know that the increased closeness was likely contributing reason as to why she left. Oh, hell yes. 100%. Abso-fucking-lutely yes. In hindsight, I can see how the EFT wasn't at all adequate for the kind of help we needed. No, I probably exacerbated the problem. Which, by the way, to your credit, if you didn't know what you didn't know, that's not your fault. Emotionally focused therapy is going to bring out a lot of vulnerability. And what do avoidant attachers, particularly those that are severe, hate? Oh, that's right, vulnerability. So I think you went in with the right intentions, but I think that if you didn't realize that that was the trigger, then you probably unwittingly brought about the end of this experience as well. Which, by the way, you didn't do this with the foresight that you were going to break it up by taking her to therapy, and it's not your fault for doing that. I think it was a very smart decision for both of you, for what you knew. But it seems to me like even before agreeing to go to EFT, I suspect that this was probably inevitable. Like, to me, it seems like the ruptures were there even way back when you were away in Mexico together as well too. But still, I can understand just feeling horrible about the way in which, she's basically unilaterally taken away all of your agency and also this great relationship that you had. I mean, you were integrating her with your kids. God, I could imagine they'd feel pretty terrible about this as well too. It's abandonment for them as much as it is for you. In any case, I've realized, but there is a silver lining in that after the breakup, she quickly got herself into doing individual therapy, which is something that I've encouraged her to do for a long time. I have my own 2 cents on that. I've realized how much I walked on eggshells with her and how I could have avoided a lot of pain if I put better boundaries in place. I swept a lot of things she said under the rug, including when she said she didn't think she had the emotional maturity to exit a relationship in a healthy way and that she pushes everyone away. I see the parts that I played in our negative dynamic, especially how I would emotionally dump, which came through as criticism, and how I eroded emotional safety for her every time I threatened the relationship. To understand that I hurt somebody I deeply love with these behaviors is a tough pill to swallow. And I miss her more than anything, and I feel like what she and I had was really special. I've been having such a hard time functioning, and I feel like I'm still a ways off from really accepting this reality. Okay, Simon, I want to address that straight away by saying, firstly, I'm really sorry that you've gone through this experience and you still feel this way probably. I'm really sorry that, this person has behaved in this way, but let's put all the, Luna's dysfunctional behavior to one side for a minute. You seem to have had a phenomenal connection with Luna. She's someone who, towards the end, was starting to get integrated with you and your family. It seemed like there were multiple attempts made to try and repair and work on this relationship. You were also self-reflecting on the ways in which you were, according to Luna, emotionally dumping on her, and also how the threats to end the relationship were perceived by Luna, causing her to react. Now, I will give some suggestive feedback in just a second about those two things, but I just want to say I could understand if you feel like it is your fault. I could understand if you feel like it's my fault that this ended. It's my fault that I was being too emotionally explosive with her. My attempts to assert boundaries came across as too harsh, like I was controlling her. that the closeness I was trying to engineer for us also subsequently caused everything to go pear-shaped, etc. It's very normal to have those fears and feelings, especially when you're being made out to be the villain in this experience, when it seems like Luna doesn't want to take any accountability for her behavior in this entire dynamic at all. It's not fair. You don't deserve that. And I can understand that you probably have a very big part of you that feels like, it's my fault. I will do anything I can to fix this. How can I try and make this work with her? I really want to see if there's a way to make this work. And before I start to sound like an infamous how to get your ex back coach, I just want to say I can understand the reasons and the feelings that you might have at this particular point in time. I do think that, just taking a step back from this is a pretty bad case of dating someone who has a very mega fearful avoidant attachment style. I'm actually going to say dismissive leaning fearful avoidant attachment style with likely a personality disorder. Like, honestly, there's a lot of stuff going on here on Luna's side. Yes, I want to make it clear, I don't think she's a bad person, but I can see, based on what you've written, that she has got so much work to do ahead of her. Let's address the therapy point about her going to seek out individual therapy. I'm going to just lay out a very realistic and honest truth, which is I don't think she's going to get much benefit from it. The thing is that for a lot of these individuals, they have to be at a point where they're psychologically ready to be able to work on themselves. And when they're the dumpee, when they have dumped you, and they feel relief off the back of it, it is very easy for them to construe a narrative that you were the problem. I feel relief now that it's over. Thank God they were the problem. It's not me, it's them, right? Now, even though we know that a lot of avoidant attachers, in fact, all of them, will subsequently feel shame, guilt, and also will miss you, it doesn't mean that that's going to lead to an awakening from Luna. It doesn't mean that in therapy, she's necessarily going to realize, I made the biggest mistake of my life. She is more likely to continue out these patterns, resolve her cognitive dissonance with her therapist, who might say, well, I think it's just best if you move on and get on out there and it'll be hunky-dory in the middle of the night. I know a lot of fearful avoidant attachers who really don't sit with what's happened. But in saying that, I don't want to be completely, negative Nancy on this, which is to say, there is, fingers crossed, hope that this has been a significant enough experience for her that she actually wants to do the inner work and work on this. But 8 times out of 10, unless you were the one to dump her, or she dated someone with a big avoidant attachment style that affected her well-being, unfortunately, I don't think she's going to see her part in this until something happens to her where she can't crawl out of that rock bottom without also acknowledging her responsibility in this too. So that's why I'm just going to say I don't have the highest of hopes for her seeking out therapy at this particular point in time, because she may not see or want to acknowledge her role in what's happened here too. Now, you mentioned that your emotional dumping was something that she perceived as criticism. I don't really know what your definition of emotional dumping is. To me, emotional dumping is when you basically are, without sort of permission, just sort of explaining all your feelings and how you've been hurt. So like, for instance, with friends, with family, it's expected to just be like, hey, can I just tell you about my day? And you just sort of go off and you just sort of express your feelings, right? With the hopes that they won't jump into solution mode. They'll just listen to you and hear how you're feeling. That is the hope, right? So, for you, to me, I would say if you were just venting, if you were just explaining how you're feeling, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that within reason. Where it becomes emotionally dumping is if you're constantly, chronically talking about the same thing over and over again without actually taking the steps to work on it. A case that I'm thinking of would be like, oh, I'm so depressed. I'm feeling really helpless and hopeless with everything right now because nothing is getting better. I feel like I can't do anything to work on myself. Nothing is ever working. And you're not saying that just like once for 2 minutes. You're saying that every time you meet. You make every conversation about your feelings. You also aren't thinking about the impact of how it feels to just constantly hear all this over and over and over again. That's where I'm like, let's just take a step back here. Are you emotionally dumping, or are you just bonding by talking about your feelings, and it's also constructive to the health of the relationship? Because if you're saying things like, hey, I love you, babe, but I'm also really feeling hurt because you're not interacting with the kids. You're someone special to me. They're special to me. It actually really hurts to feel like you don't also consider them an extension of this experience together. And you'll also bring it up over and over and over again. I don't think that's so much emotional dumping, more as like feedback. So I do think that when it comes to this experience, I'm like, look, I can't assess what the emotional, like how you would define emotional dumping. But knowing fearful avoidance who lean dismissive don't exactly have the biggest bandwidth for hearing emotions from other people because they think they're dealing with too much as it is already, then I'd say I'm almost willing to question whether you actually were emotionally dumping, which is not to say you weren't, but it's just to say, realistically speaking, like unless you were just chronically talking about the same thing and weren't taking steps to work on it and also, to manage some parts of that yourself, then I think you're okay. I want to finish this point off by saying I think it's perfectly reasonable to have co-regulation to talk about our shit. Like, it's normal to have that. What's not okay is when you expect someone else to manage your feelings 100% of the time. That's why journaling, meditation are great exercises for emotional regulation, so that way you can take a part of it, and if you need to vent out just a little bit of heat out of it to talk it with someone, great. That's wonderful. But I do think that when it comes to insecure attachment, I know a lot of people get it twisted with, how much they should talk with people, and they tend to under-regulate with others, over-regulate with others, be, extremely sensitive to hearing any emotion from another person, or reverse, or listen to way too much and don't have boundaries and become unpaid therapists. So balance is key with this. And I am thinking that given Luna's hyperreactivity to a lot of parts of this relationship, it really wouldn't surprise me if she was overreacting and you were being made to blame for being too emotional. And I also want to state too that I know there's a lot of information online from, look, to be honest, well-intentioned, well-educated people who talk about how to talk with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, saying like, look, if you've got emotional stuff, think about them because they may not have the bandwidth for it. I say that shouldn't stop you, though, from still talking. They're your romantic partner, and they shouldn't be criticizing you, for having a moment where you need to talk about stuff. I personally think that a lot of avoidant attachers need to step it the fuck up, because we can't be bending ourselves like beachside deck chairs just to make them safe and happy, because it's just unreasonable. So, no, my point with that is, all that is to say that I worry that this was a very one-sided experience in this particular case. Secondly, with regards to the other bit of feedback that you got, which was how your threats with her poor behavior to break up the relationship might have been heavy-handed, to which I say, possibly. And look, I noticed that even early in the letter that you had mentioned how when something didn't feel good, you were also thinking about terminating the relationship. On the anxiously attached side, a protest behavior that can be frankly problematic, that, is worth reflecting on, is when people have this knee-jerk reaction to threaten the relationship when things are feeling unstable, but they're not actually planning on following through with that threat. They'll basically be like, if you're acting this way, then I think we should break up. And they have no intention of actually following through with that. What they want is for their partner to demonstrate that they're still committed and into the relationship. I've seen that play out in some of these dynamics, and I'm here to say, if you feel that, incensed that something's not quite right, it suggests to me that, one, you probably have had boundary violations. Two, you may be under communicating your feelings, which it sounds like in your case, it wasn't a case of under communicating. It may have been a case that you were not being seen and heard, and this was a reaction as a consequence. Three, if you feel that way, then the internal boundary, and this is a harder thing to achieve, should be to go, if I'm feeling this way after trying to communicate my feelings to my partner and they're still not listening to me, I think I should actually walk because this isn't healthy for me. And it sounds like this was a torturous experience in spite of all the amazing stuff you had. You seem like you had great sex, beautiful bonding moments with the EFT therapist, time away together. I'm not here to make it seem like this was a complete shit show because it wasn't. There's obviously lots of great stuff here. But, I just sort of think that my hope is for you, Simon, that going forward, without really knowing what, how that protest behavior came out in its entirety, my hope, fingers crossed, is that, one thing you can take from this is also building some inner boundaries, working on that sort of stuff where you might feel like you resort to those protest behaviors if that ever happens. But you know what, for the most part, I got to give you credit where it's due. I think you handle things like a champ. You obviously have an understanding of repair, communication, how to navigate this. I think that when it comes to the way you navigated this, you actually handled it really well given the circumstances. I think, though, that Luna has years ahead of her to be at a stage where she's ready for a relationship. And I can tell you now, as someone who's grown up with people who have insecure attachment styles, there is nothing quite like having a parent who's a dismissive avoidant, who's not working on their stuff, and makes you feel unseen, unheard, disconnected. So I feel sorry for your kids, if I'm completely honest. I know she wasn't necessarily their birth mother, but there is something quite awful about having a parent who just refuses to connect and acknowledge you. And I'm sure a lot of people who are part of this conversation today, whether they're listening to it now or listening to it later, will relate to what it feels like to have that level of emotional negligence and neglect from a significant caregiver. So yeah, I'm going to round out here by saying, Simon, thank you very much for submitting this. I know you also shared another thing with me as well too, which was, I believe, a question regarding the whole experience. I'm going to see if I can just bring that up now as I'm wrapping this up, because it would be good to talk about. I can see here you've written, I guess one big question I have around the whole experience is how inevitable you think it is that it ended the way it did. Oh, 100% inevitable. In hindsight, I see a lot of ways I could have created more emotional safety for her, but at the time I didn't have the knowledge and I was highly anxious and triggered by her distancing. These kind of relationships and abrupt endings suck. That they do. All right. I'm going to give a little bit of tough love to every single person here who leans anxiously attached, who likely has a fawn response and wants to do the best by an avoidant partner. Stop trying to create emotional safety for them. Frankly, they should be telling you how to create emotional safety for them and involving you with that. If you have to guess how to give emotional safety to them, you are playing into the fawn response. Now, I understand that the fawn response is a very sophisticated adaptation system, and frankly, I think a lot of you are some of the most empathic, intuitive people I've ever met. I could do an entire series talking about the people who come to my page because I think all of you have some gifts. You're all excellent at having awareness, understanding, empathy, and you're very good at getting on with people. I'd say that your social skills are an 11 out of 10. Where I see people get stuck is they think it is somehow their responsibility to do more for people who are not doing enough for them. We burn out. We end up not having enough, care given to us. And so I'm here to say that, frankly, I understand the need to create emotional safety, but you're already too well equipped at creating emotional safety from the sounds of it. If anything, I think some of the things that need to happen going forward for a lot of you people, and I'm not just saying this to Simon, I mean, I'm speaking to myself here because I'm still learning how to do this, is you definitely need to consider having some moderation to your caregiving. You need to also think about your own boundaries and where your limits end. To start thinking about, okay, How much am I willing to give up of myself and actually have some hard stops to be like, look, I'm willing to give this amount of my time and energy, but not all of it. Part of the flip side of the spectrum is that avoidant attachers, as a lot of you know, give barely anything away to people. Their job is to extend more of themselves to others so that way they can involve and invite them in. Our job, complete fucking opposite. We need to actually figure out how much of my time and energy am I willing to give to this. As a counselor, I have to tell you, it's actually been a really good lesson in boundary setting and codependency, because it's very easy for people like myself to want to overgive and give more. I'm still doing it every now and then, but I've gotten better at it. And it's one of those things where we have to learn our energy matters, our time matters, our money matters, and we need to start being more selfish and ruthless with how much we let in of other people before it starts impacting our well-being. Life is a beautiful long journey, and frankly, you don't have to have, the availability for everyone in your life. So circling back to what Simon is asking here, how could I have given her more safe? I actually think you did the best you could. Look, if you were going to go into it again with, a new version of yourself, if you were to work on this differently, I truly think if it were me, for instance, the way I might handle it is I might start working on my own stuff in terms of looking at, okay, how am I feeling in this dynamic? What boundaries do I need to assert differently? And how do I follow through with that? How do I actually work on making sure that I'm getting the treatment I need in this relationship without feeling angry, disappointed, disrespected? How can I also bring that to my partner in an assertive way? Assertive ways might include saying, babe, Luna, I love you. I really want to make this work. When I can't understand why you're angry with me, it makes me feel shut out. And I want to resolve things if I'm responsible for them and if I'm truly responsible for them. But if I don't know what I'm responsible for, it honestly makes me feel like I can't actually work on this relationship and I'm just getting blamed for nothing. I truly don't believe that I'm responsible for everything here, but can you help me and also work with me to find out what's going on? Because I want to help create a relationship that's amazing for both of us, and I do believe we can do that. Then see how Luna reacts. Because I can assure you that if Luna has a meltdown over that, where you've said that assertively and in quite a reasonable way, that says a lot about her. To me, it sounds to me like you've done the best you can given the circumstances, and Luna's not going to be able to handle that. I often find that for a lot of people, that when they try the approach of killing someone with kindness, where you basically just act as polite as possible to get along with others, the deep irony is that you will still find that even at your most polite, if the behavior doesn't change, it's clearly a them problem, not a you problem. What are you going to do? Go mute? And it also is one of those things where I got to tell you, and this is as someone who's recovering from this too, you don't want to have excessive resentment build up. A lot of people who are in their people pleasing, their fawn response, develop a lot of unhealthy resentment that builds up and just eats you alive like lava and scorched earth. Please be mindful of resentment that builds up, because it can lead to a lot of rage, a lot of anger episodes that aren't the healthy kind of angry episodes. We're talking the self-destructive kind. And it's important to have regulation for anger, because it's a very healthy emotion when exercised in a way that's appropriate for everyone. But when it's not being regulated, it can lead to all kinds of dysfunctional, moody stuff that's just not helpful. So that's why I'd say just be mindful of how you're feeling in the moment when things aren't working out, because it's often a sign that you need to communicate it out. But there are some people who will never want to take accountability and responsibility. So this goes back to another question, which is, how inevitable do I think the whole situation was? I honestly, look, okay, out of respect to you, let's just say you didn't go to, therapy. You didn't go to EFT to try and work on this, right? Let's just pretend it never happened. Had you never gone to EFT, I suspect that this probably would have ended up going pear-shaped, because we already know she's broken up with you multiple times. She has been the one to end things after small seeming infractions. on the trip to Mexico, she was looking for evidence as to why this wasn't going to work out. She was suggesting that you were going to be socially inept at a bloody wedding when she's been with you for a while. Like, where is she getting this information from? And how dare she say, you're socially inept, so I don't want to invite you to a wedding? What an insecure, petty thing to say to someone. That's not okay at all. That's bullying and it's a put down. So I don't accept that. And look, obviously you're not my client, but I'm just saying that's just offensive. So not okay to say that to someone. I truly do think that whilst she absolutely, as evidenced by the EFT, has lots of positive feelings for you, I also think that her capacity to self-sabotage and push a good thing away are far greater than her capacity for love. And I think it was only a matter of time before this was just going to go the way that it did. I was actually suggested to read Jojo, who's an artist, her memoir that came out recently, because my colleague was reading it and saying, oh my God, this artist, she's absolutely got an avoidant attachment. Because at one point, Jojo goes on to apparently write about how the best, like one of the greatest loves she ever had, she cheated on them even though she loved them, and she pushed them away. And she knows that she did that because if it was her low self-esteem, it had nothing to do with the fact that she didn't love the person, but she was just scared of actually getting committed with him. And she also apparently had other stuff going on. I will read the memoir to confirm if that's consistent with my understanding of it. But I think it really speaks to the fact that often in this dating world of ours, we want simplified answers. We want clean answers like, did they love us or not? You know, if they loved me, they would never treat me this way. But I go back to what I said in my post today, which is to say that when you've been modeled love like this, where you overwhelm someone with love and then push them away, where you are with someone where you then chastise them and bully them and then push them away only to come crawling back, that is a way of modeling love, and it's awful because it's dysfunctional. And that's obviously something she's learned from childhood. So when it comes to this experience, Simon, I honestly think that this is something where her trauma was showing, and this is her way of showing love to someone, and she cannot handle proper intimacy, and it's going to take her years to work through this stuff. Honestly, you're welcome to try again to see if it's going to work out, but I honestly think it's more of the same at this particular point. But I am sorry that you had to go through this because it is terrible. All right, everybody, I'm going to round out here. Thank you very much for attending today's live. As an update, I am thinking, separate to all of what I've said today, of doing a video at some point calling out some very dodgy malpractice from Get Your Ex Back coaches, because I'm feeling brave and safe enough to call a lot of their shit out. And I'm just thinking it's actually quite relevant, because if you like them, fantastic. But I do think that there are a lot of really dodgy charlatans out there who try and manipulate people into getting back into these very addictive, maladaptive, dysfunctional messes. And whilst they may serve people for a purpose, I actually think it's so bad. And also when I found out that a lot of them were actually people who have an avoidant attachment, I actually thought this is just so wrong, because it's not okay to try and teach people how to get an ex back when you know, if you are avoidantly attached, how this goes down every single time. I actually think it's deeply deceptive and misleading, and just such a terrible way of trying to absolve your guilt for how you've behaved in the past. I just think it's such unethical stuff. In any case, a rant for another day. But just wanted to say that's something that I'm thinking of cooking on the menu down the line as well too. May even do it tomorrow. Who knows? All right. Thank you everybody for joining today's live. As a reminder, if you are interested in submitting a letter to me, just to give everyone a bit of an update. In one of yesterday's lives, I said that I'm thinking of reducing the word count to 500 words because it's a little easy to get through. I'm willing to maybe be a bit flexible on that depending on how things go, but I am going to be taking a little bit of a break from the Ken Reads for just a couple of weeks at the end of October just to recharge, and then come November, I'll get straight back into it. But the submissions for October which will be read in November, will open in the third week of October. So not this week, not next week, but the following week. But I just want a bit of a break from it because I'm starting to get a bit of compassion fatigue. And whenever that happens, it's a cue for me to be like, all right, off to nature I go and recharge and reboot, because otherwise I become grumpy and I don't want to do that to people as well too. So thank you everyone for participating today. I will see you guys for the next live or letter reading.